Hello everyone and welcome back to the Lost Wisdom of the Earth Telesummit. Now my guest today is a landscape intuitive as well as being a landscape architect and teacher. He also leads pilgrimages or pilgrimage walks, maybe I should say, through the city landscape of London and elsewhere as well. Pilgrimage, he says, is a powerful journey through the self where our connection to our inner knowledge is deepened by our connection to the land we are walking through. To tell us more about this and what it means when we talk about sovereignty of the land is Jeremy Rye. Jeremy, welcome.
Hello, welcome. Thank you.
Well, that's fascinating, everything that you say about pilgrimage. So can we just start by giving people who are really unaware what we mean by that a brief introduction to what pilgrimage is, or how you work with pilgrimage?
What I believe is that the landscape, like ourselves, has a series of areas or chakras, however you want to refer to them, running through it. So like ours, has a root, it has a heart, it has a crown. And in certain areas, you can actually walk these physically because you can see how they've been manifested in the land. And so if you're walking through a landscape chakra system or a landscape temple, as Peter Dawkins refers to it, you're actually also walking through your own self. And so using the landscape to help you connect into yourself, you can actually find, discover and hear different things that you never knew that you had hidden from yourself, or answers to questions that you've been sort of just trying to find answers to for absolutely ages. And it can be a tool which you endeavor to get deeper into your own understanding of yourself, but wonderfully by reciprocation, by you walking the land, it receives a benefit from you from walking with intention. So it can change and it can connect into you and your energy at the same time. And so there's a marriage goes on between it when you set the right intention and you walk in a deliberate manner.
So this is a win-win. You give something to the land and the land gives something back to you effectively.
And we've talked about this, but the Romans had this idea already. They used solvitur ambulando, that's solved by walking. So that idea that your issues, the way that you want to connect to your inner self, can actually be solved by walking. Wonderful. But if you can also walk through an energetic landscape in a way that can actually respond to you as well, through signs and symbols as you go, suddenly you'll be able to connect into different parts of yourself and see different things going on around you.
Wonderful. Now, I mentioned that some of these talks you do, they're within the City of London. Now, that's not where people would necessarily think of a pilgrimage route. They kind of think of it as being to a sacred place or something like that. But Peter Dawkins, who talked earlier in the summit, he explained to us about landscape temples, and I know you've done work with Peter, and you use the same idea of landscape temples. So you find the landscape temple within a cityscape. How do you go about doing that?
Well, at first it's important to understand that whilst actually going to sacred space and walking in proper countryside is beautiful and is wonderful, a lot of us live in cities and don't necessarily have day-to-day access to that.
Yeah.
Whereas within the city, if we can find ways to actually achieve that as well, then we've got much more opportunity to be able to connect into ourselves. And it's there in the fabric of the city. Often throughout its history, certain places or certain things were positioned in certain places for certain reasons. People understood how this city was going to work and what it needed to do to achieve its highest potential, and for those people who are actually working and living and existing in that city. So often what you're looking for is to find the start point. Where is it that feels like it is a root? Where is it that feels like it's got a point of foundation to you, where you can connect into things that have gone before, people that have gone before? But the other one is to find the heart center, and sometimes that's often the easiest place to start, but it's not the showiest place to start.
Well, the heart never is the showiest, is it? That tends to be the solar plexus more than anything, where the ego resides. Absolutely.
The heart is a quiet, but it's a still place and it's a quiet place. So often, if you think you found that, if you get that sense when you're there, then it's a starting point to work to see whether you're actually connected into that space. And then from there, you can begin to fit in. And there's necessarily a logic to it and a story behind it often. And some of the ones we've walked with have a definite story that's been passed on about why they were there or what they've been helped and used for in the past.
I think it might be quite useful actually to give people a specific example, because I mean, something like there's one, am I right, the Tower of London to Westminster.
Yeah, well,
that's one of the ones you work with. Can you talk people through that one?
Yeah, that was the introduction to the word sovereignty for me. That's where the whole idea of what sovereignty was and sovereignty of land began. Because that one I was shown, because actually it is the original walk that the monarch, before they were crowned, took from the Tower of London to Westminster Abbey. And the idea was that in this walk, there was a preparation, there was a transformation. They had to move from the state of being the person they were at that point to somebody ready to accept the crown, ready to accept sovereignty. Sovereignty of the land that they were going to be custodian of.
And they would spend, correct me if I'm wrong here, but they would spend, a night a night, as in NIGHT, in vigil, wouldn't they, before the coronation?
Absolutely, in the Tower of London, absolutely in that space, trying to work through what it was that they were about to accept and take on as a responsibility. But then why the walk? Well, we do have an inkling on this because James I couldn't actually do the walk because of plague in London at the time. So what he chose to do was to set up an alternative route that he could do, and he built 7 gateways.
Right.
He built 7 arches. So when we talk about the Chakra system and the landscape temple system being 7, he actually built these 7. And we have the drawings, they're in the V&A, of what he actually would have built. And he chose to walk under those as a way to go from one place to another. The actual idea of this and the pilgrimage isn't written down anywhere, but it's that work that we do. When you see a story, you feel into that story, and it becomes something that you relate to and work with. So our starting point is the Tower of London. It's where they spent the night. Emerging from there, they would then begin a procession, and it was a mighty big procession. And a lot of people were involved in supporting them on this through the streets of London, the old streets of London. And so they would move on from there. And so you would find different stages that as you walk the landscape, you would begin to feel were relevant for that. So, I mean, I suppose the best one to think about is the next one would be the old London Stone, which is the sacral point of the walk. The London Stone, which was outside Canonbury Station, and will be again, it's removed at the moment because the building it's attached to is being rebuilt, but you'll be able to see it, it's going to come back.
But for those who aren't aware of it, what's the relevance of the London Stone?
I believe the London Stone was placed in position as being the heart of what was called the City of London. So within the city walls, which became the Roman city walls, but it predates all of that. So
it's something that goes right back to almost the foundations of London.
Absolutely, way back. And for that, it was the Hearthstone, which is a completely different wall, which we'll leave on one side, but that's why it was called the Hearthstone of the City of London. And so that is a really significant point of where you would get to, where you are connecting in with all the rest of the other people that you have to work with, the other people, the communities that are around you. And then
because the sacral, again, for those who aren't that familiar with chakra systems, that's about your relationship with other, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
other people. So it's really your relationship with your subjects, with the people you work with the land around you, everything.
Yeah, and look at where it is. It's right in the heart of the City of London, where the biggest business community from time immemorial started and continues to work. So it's perfectly positioned for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then moving on for the Solar Plexus, you're looking at St Paul's Cathedral. It sits on a hill, one of the hills.
Yeah, here I am.
Exactly, pronouncing itself, as it still does.
Yeah.
It still sits there proud in London. And again, that for me is about the connection to yourself. It's the connections you make, the way you deal with yourself, how you nurture yourself, how you love yourself in those aspects. So if you imagine if you're walking as a sovereign and you're walking from the Tower of London, which connects into your ancestry, I mean, that is the heart of the ancestry of our monarchy.
Yeah.
You walk through into the City of London and look, how will you deal with the business community? How you deal with all those people that will come to you, that need your support and your help, but are there as part of the business world of how you're going to run your country. And then you move on to St Paul's Cathedral. And there, your dedication is to yourself. How will you act in this role? How will you work within your own field of it? You do walk this walk, and I'm saying this at this point because we're moving out of the City of London. You walk it differently. You don't slouch. You kind of walk with a bearing on you. And it's very interesting that when I've taken people on it, you do find them sort of looking around themselves at the world in general and walking with a different mindset than you would do on different walks. It's quite fascinating. And then from there, we move out of the City of London and we walk into the bit that existed between the two cities, the City of London and the City of Westminster. And we reach the heart point. The heart point is the Temple of London, where all the lawyers are, right in that part of London. And it's called a temple. And it's a quiet, as we said before, reserved place. You go into the walls, it's still got that sense of being a collegiate structure in a building.
It is actually, it seems like a little bubble in the centre of all the hubbub.
Yeah, and you can withdraw into it. And obviously inside you have the Templar Church, the circular church, because it was the centre for the Knights Templar, one of their centres in London. And actually, I am beginning to find a pattern in this, and a lot of the landscapes that I am working with, that the heart at one point has been acknowledged by the Templars in some way. This is still a work in progress, so I'm loving sharing it with people, but I haven't quite worked out what they knew, how they knew, or what they were doing. But
but it's very obvious, not just from what you're saying, but from what other people have been saying. The Knights Templars really, really understood geomancy, really understood working with the land, big time, didn't they?
And something about holding that place and working with it and being custodians of it in a way as well. It comes up quite a lot of times that you're like, oh, okay, so they had an encampment here, or they had a palace, or they had something here as well. So there's more to ferret around in that, which is what I love about doing this, because again, it feeds you, but it also feeds the land. And what's going on? Why was that important? And then the lawyers were positioned there. Mercy, justice, the heart. It felt really, really positive that would be blossoming in that sort of area and reminding those people about their role in this world and in this land. We're back to the sovereignty again. We've had the businessmen, now we have the lawyers. How will they act? How will they work in this land? And relates back to you. So how will you do that? Thinking about, where do you bring out mercy? Where do you need to bring out justice? And how does that feed into your emotional self as well? And then, this is quite a long walk we're talking about here. There's normally a coffee break within the heart. I'd like to point that out to people. It's possible to take breaks. This isn't like, you don't have...
Not a yomp.
going through it. It's quite a nice place to spend the time before you move on. And so you move on through there, and we start to go through the sort of the throat, the long neck, and we're walking right the way down to what is Charing Cross. And all this is following the river. For people who don't know London hugely well, we're staying on the north bank of the River Broadon, and the Charing Cross was the centre where all the nobles were. It's where they had all their houses. So if you're looking for people who are going to offer you advice, if they're looking at sounding the word, sounding the truth, taking in, and as a sovereign, having to take in and filter all of that information and then turn it into something that you are prepared to work with and how you are going to govern your people and work with your people. That, of course, would be the centre where everybody would actually be residing for you.
Mm.
Your support system in that way, as it always had been.
Yeah.
And then you have a little kink and you turn down Whitehall and you come to what effectively was the Whitehall Palace, which had always been the residence of the monarchs. Originally was the Palace of Westminster, but when that burnt down, they moved into this. And I think something wonderful happened at that point, because we are going on to Westminster Abbey, as we've talked about. But at that point, they detached themselves from that part of the chakra system and moved into this area. And it's the wisdom, it's the brow chakra.
Yeah, the insight, the inspiration.
You want them to live in wisdom. You want them to be decreeing and working and governing to a point of wisdom. And so that always feels really, really good. And now is the seat of our government. We'll
talk about all this in a minute.
And we'll walk on. And you walk onto Westminster Abbey, into the palace yard, into the abbey itself, which is the crowning point and is the crown. And we've talked about this, and it's wonderful that sometimes these pilgrimages interconnect, but that was built on an island which was known as Thorn Island, or Thorny Island. I'm still looking at exactly what that was, but it fits in with the story and the myth of the hawthorn as well, being the crown of thorns, a thorn that was... But
also the hawthorn is the fairy bush, isn't it?
The fairy bush as well.
And the fairies are related to the Shining Ones stroke the Elvens, the Elven race, who are meant to be the elders of us human beings.
And that's what we're connecting into. We're connecting into a higher being at that point.
Yes.
So the landscape we're beginning to see kind of will guide you as well to where things are positioned and where things will be most appropriate to sit.
Yeah.
And when you think originally of having two cities and needing to become one, how do you hold those two together? Well, the heart is the balance point. It balances both the City of London and the City of Westminster and creates a whole.
Yeah.
And that was required for the monarch, for the sovereign of the land, to be able to govern appropriately. It was their power base in many ways.
Yeah.
So I think, for me, when we talk of sovereignty, that was my introduction to how, if you are looking and thinking in a way that is about embodying sovereignty, that there is a transformation that has to happen. There's an intention that you have to set. And the landscape can help you think through all those different areas of where do I need to be working, adjusting, being conscious, so I can remove myself into that state of sovereignty.
We're going to talk in a moment about what that meant in, going back a long, long time when we talk about sovereignty. But I mean, what you've just explained to us there, that walk that the sovereign takes to be crowned. I mean, nowadays I think they're probably going to coach. They wouldn't do it on foot, would they? But but that walk that went from the Tower of London, which was, supposedly one of the founding areas of London, the White Tower on the old mound, to Westminster Abbey where they were crowned, if it was done with intention and with understanding and with knowledge, there was a very real transformation that should be taking place within the person as they make this. And we're talking in some ways, from everything you've said, we're talking about ideals. And of course in the real world things fall flat. we want our government to be inspirational and have insight and things like that, and of course I think we could argue that that isn't quite what we're seeing, but we have this blueprint within that for the ideal, don't we?
We do, and the landscape has offered that to us. It's offered that up to us to be able to work with it. And whilst we're all not in training necessarily to become monarchs, we are in training to become sovereigns of our own self. We're actually sovereigns of the land that we have our custodians over or choose to adopt as our home. And I think that's where it becomes really, really important. And is very relevant to exactly where we are today. Amazing.
And I've done this walk with Jeremy And I have to say, it's very special. It is very special. So anybody who gets the opportunity, I recommend that we'll put up details how
we will
keep in touch with you about that.
Yeah,
I think you use a Facebook page, don't you?
And we will be doing it again, because it's becoming more and more important that we're honouring the land in this way, as well as honouring the person.
Well, let's go on to talk about that, honouring the land and sovereignty of the land. Sovereignty of the land was something that was talked about a lot. You read it in the myths and how the goddess embodied the sovereignty of the land and things like that. So let's talk about this old understanding that was in some ways being repeated in this walk that you've just talked about.
For me, the sovereignty of the land it's our vital energy source. When the land is respected and worked in a way that responds to its right to sovereignty as well as our right to sovereignty, we come together in a form of balance, where we can hear, we can understand, and we can respond to its needs as well as our own. There's no ambiguity between how we're working and what we're doing. It is our gift, or its gift to us, I should say, in terms of the fact that our role on this earth is about custodianship. Our role is custodianship of the earth and of the land. That's what our role is. That's part of our sovereignty.
I want to cheer every time I hear this, and speaker after speaker has said it, and every time somebody says it again, it's like, yes! Please, people, understand this.
It is. And when we see ourselves in this role, and when we see how we can choose to work, and we're not all the same, we don't all need to work in the same way, but we all have this underlying understanding that what we do and how we impact on the land and on the earth and with each other has a huge part to play in the well-being of it, ourselves, and our communities. And so that way we're also balancing out with all the other realms that rely on us to work with the land in a positive way. That we connect into them, and they, through us, can work with the land in very different ways. And it's not just us, there are other ways that they do it as well. But we are one of those parts that is important for the health and well-being of all the different realms and the ones that we work with.
Because this is something that our ancestors knew, and it was woven into every aspect of the way they lived. And we've become disconnected from that at a very deep level. And within that, I mean, from what I'm hearing you say, within that is we've become disconnected from our own sovereignty at the same time. By that disconnection from the land, we've lost the sovereignty over ourselves. And many would argue that came in with the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, which very clearly wanted the individual to be disconnected from his sovereignty, because they wanted that authority to be conferred in the church, didn't they?
I mean, I think yes, that they were part of it, but there have been lots of different challenges that we have faced in our growth that have given us roads that we can choose to go down either way. And what we are have been consistently choosing is a road that was going to take us further away from our connection to the landscape. Because the further we get disconnected from the landscape, the less empowered we are in our own self. And therefore, in some ways, for those that want us to be disempowered, it is right to take us down this road, to make sure that we don't fulfill our own potentials, that we are able to walk in a different way, that the land isn't something that we regard as the first port of call about how we work and how we live in this world. It's somewhere way, way down there that we'll campaign for later once we've satisfied all our other needs first, rather than if it doesn't work for the land, it's not actually going to work for us. And so I think we faced all these challenges, and we still do face them. And I'm part of that as well. I'm reflecting on how have I bought in, and what is the perceived wisdom that I'm still carrying that actually isn't being helpful to that idea of my sovereignty and the sovereignty of the land.
So how do you work with this?
How do I work with it?
Yeah. I mean, where do you take these ideas and these understandings? So, the land reflects our self-sovereignty and our connection or disconnection in that way sort of is mirroring a lack of empowerment within us. So if people listening in are sort of thinking, okay, well, I can see that, where do they go with it?
In the first instance, I've been working on, well, what does sovereignty actually mean for me? What is it?
Yeah.
And where I'm coming to at the moment is the idea that the sovereignty sits at the balance point, the center of everything. It's that connection point between my inner and my outer world. But both my inner and my outer world have a connection into the landscape in itself. So my inner thoughts, the way that I work through things, the way that I work through my own self, it gets played out in the landscape and my connection to the landscape. And obviously physically, the way that I am in my external environment plays out into the landscape and the sovereignty of the land. And what I'm beginning to do is to look at how does that all fit together with what I believe is what I'm here to do and how I interact within that landscape. And I'm beginning to see areas where I'm now uncomfortable with what I've been doing before. And I'm therefore responding to that in a different way. And I can feel it within myself, that how I then begin to change a direction or change a point, or the way that things come to me start to fit together much better than they ever have before, because I'm making more intelligent decisions about things. But in terms of actually working it, we're back to everything we've been talking about before. It's being out and getting out into the land and working with the land. It is there for us as a teacher. It is there for us to actually help empower us by showing us what it needs and therefore challenging us to change the direction of our path.
Yeah, and by working with the landscape temple, whether you're in the countryside or you're in a town or you're in a city like London, there are these landscape temples to be found, these chakra systems to be found. By working with the chakra system, wherever you are, by finding that, it's one of the tools that you can use to do this.
But what I'm also finding is that people are coming to me and talking to me about wanting to find their own pilgrimage walk.
Oh, now that's fascinating. Tell us about that.
Well, it's literally just people are starting to come and ask questions about it, because there are ones that are laid down which we've talked about. But in one particular case, they were very keen to do a pilgrimage walk around where they were born and to understand the impact that it had on them and actually understand their connection to that very place. They were born where they lived, so it was a very strong connection for them. And I was able to sit down with them and to look at where they were born, what was going on in that particular area, and to see how they could do their own personal pilgrimage through that was not only something that was relevant and helpful to them, but would also be relevant to the landscape. And it's quite interesting that when you do this, it actually almost comes together. So for this particular chap that I'm talking about, we were sort of working on the route and how it felt, and suddenly he was saying, well, of course, yes, that works, because actually a friend of mine used to live right there and he was part of this, and he was connecting into those chakra systems. In one point,
so his personal history was being reflected in that.
Absolutely. And we realized at one point when he left home, he moved into another house and it's right on this walk line. I didn't realize that. And when I was saying, well, I think you're going to be coming here, and he was like, oh, well, of course, that's absolutely right, because I moved from home and I lived exactly there. And it suddenly started to outplay. Now, for him, that is going to be one of his ways of connecting into the landscape that is incredibly personal and relevant to him as a person. And therefore, it's going to have more meaning. It's going to have more resonance for him as well. The landscape will respond to it regardless.
Yes.
It just means that for him, that's a place that he feels he's going to be able to start doing work.
Yes, so it's one of the things you do is you can help people to find these personal pilgrimage routes within their own landscape. Yeah, fascinating.
They're coming with the intention. They've already set that. I mean, that's what pilgrimage is really clear about. You have to come with a clear intention for what you want to do and the desire to actually do it. And we're finding that they're revealing themselves quite easily, but no, with flow. That's a better idea. They're flowing in and they're making them relevant. There's no difficulty in trying to reveal them. And I think that there is something that people can respond to in that as well at the moment, is to think where, even where you're drawn to walk, is there a relevance to you, to your life, to something, and to weave that into that pilgrimage walk, because it will be there. It will be.
Can we maybe just take people through very quickly how they might feel into the chakra system within an area? I mean, a lot of you probably won't be aware, but I've done work in the past with Jeremy, exploring some landscapes, and the one I'm thinking of in particular at this moment is what was my hometown quite some years ago, Stratford-upon-Avon.
Oh, yes.
And we worked out the chakra system for old Stratford, and fascinatingly, Stratford has two chakra systems. It has old Stratford, and then it has one which is Shakespeare related, because there's been such a strong overlay of Shakespeare in the last few hundred years that in itself is. So yeah, it was quite fascinating to sort of work that out. But people who are saying, oh, I'd really love to try and do this in some way, how do they do it? Because it is very much a process of using intuition and understanding chakras, what your chakras are, and being able to listen to your body and things, isn't it?
Yes, definitely that's part of it. I mean, I always start, because I'm absolutely fascinated by maps and plans. I go back. I want to go back to the history of that area and that place, because there are often really significant clues and beautiful and wonderful stories that the land has to tell. And when you begin to understand that, you begin to see a pattern of things that have occurred there. I mean, Stratford is got such a wealth of history. Way before, the Shakespeare stories.
I mean, he's a bit of a latecomer, isn't he? Because he's only been around for 400 or 500 years, and there's a lot more going on before that.
and that can begin to show you the shape and the form, because we talked about this. Some of our forefathers had a real understanding of how things needed to connect together, how shaping towns, cities would actually deliver a healthy city and where things needed to be. And you can pick up clues of that. So I always would recommend that people go to the map, start having a look at it. And then what we said before, you can always start to try and find the heart of something, to find the center, the balance, like that quiet center. And then look for the two extremes, and look for your root, and look for the crown. The others in between sometimes will be hidden, and it's not to worry about that, because if people haven't been looking or haven't been working with the chakra system, it sometimes does take time to reveal itself. They feel like they have a life. I always feel they have a life of their own, and sometimes they need to be gently encouraged to reveal it. And we in Stratford, we have issues about certain parts of that took time to really get into and find. And that's where
there is, again, it comes back to this idea of relationship, particularly where the land has been ignored a lot or abused. It's been misused in some ways, particularly within within a chakra system. It hasn't been respected for what the function of that chakra is. It kind of turns its back on you, doesn't it?
Well, it's a little wary. It's a little wary of who you are and what you're doing and how you're going to work this, and are you setting clear?
And it needs to be persuaded you're there in good faith and with good intention. So, as you say, it takes time, as it would with a person. You have to earn that trust.
And we had that wonderful experience in Stratford with the Heart Centre, which is the chapel,
the Guild Chapel,
which was always closed. You could never get into it. It was always absolutely shut. And we found it and we thought, this is absolutely it. This is the heart. It feels completely right. And it was only later on that suddenly it became open and welcome to Zoom.
Yeah, we kept going back and going back and going back, didn't we? And the door was always locked. And then one day, whoa.
It threw itself open. There was somebody in there to welcome us in. They were showing us inside. It was kind of like, okay, you're in. So I think also people need to realise that these things are a commitment sometimes to time, that everything can't be planned out. You can't say, right, there we go, off we do, we're done. We're done. Yeah. And that's with the one I'm doing with.
And it's not a head process.
No, it's not. No, it's not. I mean, there is a part of that, the intellectual process, when you're looking at the maps and trying to work out the topography and what's going on. But no, it really does. At some point soon, it has to fall back down and be a heart thing. So you're being guided by a heart. Yeah. And
I find as well very much that I feel it in each chakra as well. When I'm in the root, I can, it's like my root chakra resonates with the root of the land. So if you have an awareness of your chakras, that's another way you can feel into it.
Absolutely, you will feel a resonance. But also, I mean, even at simplest level, where the chakras have colours. When we were doing a walk the other day with people who had never really experienced this, one of the colleagues who was walking with me said, to somebody, well, have a look, see if you can see red, because we were in the root chakra, and suddenly they were seeing red everywhere. Yeah. And they suddenly got it, and then the next one they were seeing orange everywhere, and it was just amazing suddenly that was what they connected into. So it doesn't, you don't have to have a really in-depth, full-blown understanding of chakras. The land, with the intention, will respond in your way that you need to know and understand it, and encourage you. I mean, it is very encouraging work.
Yeah.
It wants you to respond because it gets something back from you from doing it. So you open up, it opens up. Brilliant. Brilliant.
Just said earlier, win-win. To me, that seems to be, that's what the new paradigm is all about. It's about win-win, not I win, you lose.
Perfectly exampling when we're talking about sovereignty. If you are in a place where it's win-win with everything you're working with, you are in your place of sovereignty.
Yeah.
Because that's how the land works.
Yeah.
It works to a place to get itself back into balance, to a win-win position. It wants you to be in that position. It's really important.
Brilliant. Right. You say in the little introduction you've got for your talk, how much are you prepared to grow, to regain your personal sovereignty and to heal the sovereign soul of your land?
Yeah.
Can you just tell us a little about that?
This comes down to choices and challenges. As you step onto this path of really looking and getting in depth into your sovereignty, things come up that you hadn't realized, or that become to feel uncomfortable, that you are going to have to reflect on whether you are prepared to give up and move away from, or how you work with different people. Things become uncomfortable for that. And so I look at it in terms of growth. I don't look at it in terms of things that are being given up or lost. I'm looking at it in terms of new things that I'm bringing to me, but some of the old things I'm going to have to let go of to do that. And when you're in a society that is built around ever more convenience, shall we say, how things are worked for us to make things more convenient, what I am finding on my personal journey is that I am becoming very uncomfortable where I am using things that are convenient for me, and I'm having to reassess how that is going to work and going to run in my life, and I can see it's going to make big changes. Because
when you say that, do you mean like they're convenient for you but damaging to
the
land? Yeah.
Because it's been set up in such a way that actually that isn't a win-win situation.
And I think you're absolutely right there. And I think this is one of the things that we're all being faced with. And you know, the sooner we wake up to it, the better, because a lot of what we take for granted is so destructive.
Yeah.
And as you say, it can't continue, and we've got to actually either come up with new ways of doing that, refinding that convenience in a different way that's more harmonious, or we've just got to decide that we let go of some of these things because the greater good is more important.
It is, and these are the decisions that are part of the journey to sovereignty.
Yeah.
And when you think about that pilgrimage we described, and you move from one state to another state, you are transformed. You know, those people are letting go of something, the life they could have led if they weren't taking on this position, who they could have been, what they could have done, what they could have said, all the sort of things are having to let go, because they are moving to a position where they are becoming custodian of a nation, of a land, of a people.
And more importantly than that, I mean, going back to the old days, they were seen as being you know, God's representative on earth, weren't they? I'm not just, you know, I'm talking, that's a Christian way of looking at it, but pre-Christian, the king married the goddess. He took guardianship of the land, or sovereignty of the land, through the goddess, and it was the whole coronation was a kind of ritual marriage of the goddess and the king, and she conferred the sovereignty on him at that point.
Her success, it's the goddess's success being brought up and being risen to the highest potential, that actually then feeds the people and feeds the land and feeds the king, and it's or the monarch. I want to refer, not necessarily always refer to him as the king, the monarch, but it's that relationship that was absolutely vitally important, and that is part of our role. That doesn't just sit at that role. It's part of our role. If we look at the Mother Earth as being that goddess, then it's about our success is only possible if we're elevating their success.
Yeah.
And that comes out more and more at the moment. More and more at the moment.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I mean, so thought-provoking, Jeremy, and fascinating.
So much. It's been absolutely fascinating. Been lovely talking to you and sharing everything that's going on at the moment. It's really exciting. I want people to be able to understand how exciting this is as an opportunity as well.
Yeah. Well, you know, for those who want to connect more with Jeremy, I'll make sure that his details are up, and you have a Facebook page that you put up when you do these walks through London, the different aspects of London. And some of the other stuff you do, because I know it's not just London. There are other areas that you take people into.
Yes.
And also these personal, I mean, how exciting, a personal pilgrimage walk.
You have the land talking to you directly. I love that.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much, Jeremy. As I said, fascinating, thought-provoking, and so much for us to think about. So, you know, self-sovereignty really is what these times are about. And as Jeremy has so eloquently described, it is only by our partnership with the goddess of the land, Mother Earth herself, that we actually get into a win-win situation on the whole thing. So I say again, thank you, Jeremy, and thank you to everyone who's listening, and I'll be with you again tomorrow with another speaker for the Lost Wisdom of the Earth. Thank you.